So hi, Fred. Your name is actually Fred, right?
Yes, I am. My name is Fred Bricon.
Okay.
It sounds French because it is. I'm French. I've been working at Red Hat for the past 9 years, since
But
2018,
you are too fast.
2011.
So before you started at Red Hat, what interests me the most? What was your first computer?
My first computer was Amstrad CPC. What's this? 600128. Is that something?
Sounds right, I think.
It was probably, I don't know, 12, 13.
Cool. And why you got it? For games?
Yeah, for games, for sure.
Yeah.
It was pretty expensive back then, but my parents got that computer for Christmas. That's when I started diving into computers. But
what is your favorite game?
My favorite game of all time?
Back then? Back then? No, now doesn't
back
matter.
Then?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't remember.
Really? You have to remember your first game.
Yeah, I remember a platform shooter, but I don't remember the name.
Okay.
There was playing also like a Top Gun game.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Sort of.
And you know what? There was probably F-15 Strike Eagle or something like this. This was like a Top Gun like game where you could just fly.
No, it was really something related to F-14s.
Okay.
So
you still remember?
Yeah, barely, but kind of.
So how you switch from gaming to programming? So I mean, you gamed and then.
Oh yeah, so I gamed for a long time, very long time. Even at some point when I was in university, I was during summer.
Mm.
I was working during summer in a big store selling software.
Mm-hmm.
And I was basically hired to sell video games.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that for a couple of years, like 2 months, 2 summers.
Mm-hmm.
But at that time, I was not into programming at all.
Okay.
If anything, I didn't understand anything about programming.
So the funny thing is, so you never actually started as a young boy programming. So you started way later at the university time.
Oh yes, way later. And even so I went to university, and then I actually got a degree in as an engineer in material science. So my background is not really related to computer science.
Okay.
And
so what do you learn during your studies? So what do you studied actually? So what you can work after your studies? So I cannot.
I was supposed, yeah. So it was related to material science. So meaning something related to plastics, steels. Learn how to manufacture or understand the processes into manufacturing stuff using those materials.
And was it interesting?
And yeah, kinda.
Okay.
I had high hopes before doing it.
Yeah.
And then after 3 years, I was like, nah. And then
but after 3 years, every study becomes boring. So I mean, after 3 years,
I guess. Yeah. So the funny thing is, the first year I did that, we had courses on the C language,
mm-hmm.
and I failed miserably. I was really bad at it,
mm-hmm.
really, really bad. I didn't understand anything. Second year, we started to do stuff related to web programming,
mm-hmm.
HTML, database, communication, and whatnot. And I had blast. It was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So I really loved it. And then third year, we did mainly stuff related to simulation,
mm-hmm.
Computing, finite element computing.
Wow.
So,
okay.
trying to simulate how solids behave under stress.
Like bridge, right? If you would like to find out. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and my internship on my third year was related to corrosion under stress. Let's see, corrosion related to steels in nuclear power plants.
Okay.
So it was not super fun, but still, I at that time I was kind of interested in programming a little.
Okay. So how you got the idea to study such a thing, you know?
So after graduation, I went to the army for a year. 10 months.
Okay.
And then I spent 12 months unemployed, like trying to find a job as an engineer in
what you did at the
field
army?
Field of expertise. Mostly boring stuff, uninteresting stuff. I was keeping track of blankets and
okay. So
like
you were in the French army? You were in the French army?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
and I had to go to the German
engineering
army.
corps.
Yeah, and what I my observation was that sometimes, you know, there were some soldiers, like professional soldiers, and they attempted to look the whole time busy without doing anything, you know. It was for me like interesting, you know, social observation that everyone tries to do something, but there was nothing to do. Which was, yeah.
Yeah, well, there were some good times and bad times in the army.
Yeah.
I guess the most interesting part is it's really, you can see the melting pot of backgrounds.
Yes.
Because I did some studies, so I used to hang around with people who had like a background in education, like a high level background in education. And then when you're joining the army, it's different. You see how wide the gamut of education is in the country. So yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Okay. And which how to call it? Which category of army was it? Were you in the Air Force?
So I was in the engineering corps.
Okay. What? Okay. So they build bridges and stuff like that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I was in the administration part of my company.
So in Germany, I think they are the pioneers who are building the bridges. So this is the term pioneer. Okay.
Yeah, probably. In French, it's called sapeur, like sapeur-pompier, which is a fireman. It's the same root.
Okay. But the firemen also the same. I think they were. So your category were also responsible, you know, to how to call it, de-arm the mines and stuff like that, right? So
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
But I didn't touch.
But
or whatever.
You sorted the blankets and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, that and I was doing some administrative work.
Yeah.
Nothing interesting. My plan was to just put my brains to rest for a year.
Yeah.
Which I did.
Was your brain overloaded before?
Yeah. I wanted to. Yeah.
Oh.
Like it was like a sabbatical.
Okay. So what you did before the army?
I was finishing school.
Okay.
And then 12 years of unemployment, trying to hunt for a job. And
12
then,
months,
at that time,
right?
it was
12 months. You said 12 months.
12 months.
Yeah.
Yes, 12 months.
Okay.
I said years? No, 12
years.
months.
You said years. So this would be even interesting.
My bad. No. And then it was year 2000. So at that time, it was the economy was booming. Every IT company was hiring anybody who had a diploma. So I started to work for a small service company, and they trained me for COBOL.
Wow.
Among other things, COBOL. And my first gig was not doing COBOL. I was working for a startup company in Paris. It was related to what I did was toying with JSP templates.
Okay.
So it was
With struts, I suppose, right?
No, not at all. It was a portal.
Okay.
The company was called Reef.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, they were trying to sell a portal.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked on a big project
Mm-hmm.
that they were hoping to sell to a large newspaper
Mm-hmm.
in France.
Mm-hmm.
The project failed eventually.
Mm-hmm. Like the most project at that time, you know?
Yeah, I guess. And then I was let go from that client.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did a bunch of I worked for some small projects on different technologies. I think VB, Visual Basic, at some point. What else? And then eventually I ended up at a client.
I remember a story because you mentioned Portal. At that time, I also had to build Portal, also with JSPs and use servlets. We built. It was actually prior struts, so we built something like struts by ourselves, and it worked well. So it was like e-commerce backend. And the product manager came to me and said, everything works well, but he would like to have a virtual sale assistant. So if someone buys, let's say, I don't know, a newspaper, the virtual assistant will wake up and suggest to buy something similar to this, right? So like what Amazon does right now. And this was in 2000. And back then, everything was supposed to be, you know, ultra thin clients like HTML and no business logic at the client. And I say, hey, look, this is really, it is actually somehow challenging, you know, to create an avatar which looks like, and actually the name was already set. I remember right now, the name should be Sarah. And the Sarah should, you know, just suggest you what to buy. It's like, hey, look how to do it. And I say, okay, this is, you could use Flash or Java applets and create, you know, the avatar. So, okay, this probably. But the behavior, I mean, we need something like artificial intelligence. And this was in the year 2000, right? Yeah. And we talked back and forth, and I convinced him this is actually almost impossible to create AI inside an applet, which is not somehow, you know, usable. And then he got an idea. It's like what he could do. We could have, you know, something like a call center. So if someone, you know, signs up, so then someone will just open the chat, you know, and remote control Sarah. Say, okay. But this is probably not very good, very scalable, you know, because we have something like a pool of backend workers, you know, trying to connecting to the front end. This was actually a funny idea as a predecessor of enterprise Java beans in the call center. So this is just you know, you told the story about portals and JSP. So I immediately remember my first experience asking. Someone asked me, you know, about AI and stuff like that. So sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but go ahead with VB. So you said you did Visual Basic.
Yeah, Visual Basic. Not super interesting, but eventually I ended up with a client, which was an IBM subsidiary, and for that client it was like a retail store chain. That was interesting in the sense that it was a combination of different technologies that I've worked on. So there was a backend, large mainframe. So I had to touch some COBOL programs. And on the back end, on the front end were some WebSphere servers. So we're doing some EJBs badly, and JSPs. And at that time, I discovered continuous integration.
Okay. And you enjoyed, you know, the environment, like programming, editors, and mainframes. You like that, or was it boring?
So no. I hated the mainframe part.
Okay.
I hated COBOL. But I like the Java part of it.
Okay.
But the thing that really think changed my life in a way is when I discovered continuous integration, because then I got interested in build systems.
When was it? 2003?
2003, yeah, around that time.
Okay.
So the CI server back then that I introduced to the company was cruise control. If you remember it. So everything you had to do to configure the server was to
XML.
modify some XML files directly on the server.
Yeah.
So there was no administrative UI. And then, so the projects were Java projects, running on WebSphere. And then I had to introduce Ant to build the projects. Because everything was done manually before. People would just build a WAR file with jar files on WSAD, which it's a product based on Eclipse.
It's Visual H for Java, right? It's this WebSphere application developer studio.
It's a successor of Visual H, but that WSAD was based on Eclipse. So yeah, I started to play with Ant, cruise control, and then eventually, what happened? I started to work on another project. I was project manager at the time.
How successful were you? So were you able to to deploy the entire thing with one click on commit, or how automated were the process back then?
Much better automated than initially, but not completely automated. So we were able to build the run the tests. There were not many tests at the time, but run some tests and then build a WAR, and then the deployment had to be done manually at that time. So it was really the beginning.
So some tests were executed, and you got a WAR, and the WAR had to be deployed manually.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So it was deployed by another team. There were, at the time, DevOps didn't exist. So there were people developing and there were ops. So we gave the WAR to the ops guy, and then they did the deployment. So eventually I moved on to some other project, and then I started to work on Tomcat. And then
You worked on Tomcat or with Tomcat?
No. With Tomcat.
Okay.
So the application was deployed on Tomcat, and then at that time it was about 2008. Yeah, about that, or around that time, 2007 maybe, or 6. And I started to play with Maven.
Okay, Maven 1.
Maven 2, yes. It was really the beginning of Maven 2.
Maven 2, because Maven 1 was completely different.
Yes. So Maven 2, Eclipse, and then I moved on to a different company doing the same kind of thing.
One question regarding Maven 2 and Eclipse. I mean, Eclipse support for Maven was terrible back then. So,
Yes. So that's where I'm coming to.
Oh, okay.
So what happened then, I worked on a different project, different company. At that time, it was a bigger project. We're still deploying to Tomcat. No, not Tomcat, actually. We're deploying to JBoss server 3 or 4. And at the time, we're using Eclipse as well to do our development. And then Maven support for Java EE did not exist at all. So I looked at it, and then one summer I was on vacation. I started to code the support for Java EE in Eclipse for Maven.
On vacations?
Yeah, on my spare time.
So were you so fascinated by Java EE, or what's?
So it was just because I was using Java EE at work.
Okay.
That and Java EE support in M2E at the time didn't exist. That I went on, and I had no prior knowledge about Eclipse development, Maven development, nothing.
And what was lacking? Because for Java EE, you only need the API in some.
So at the time, in Eclipse, the only thing you could do was maybe deploy a war project to a Tomcat server.
Oh, okay.
And that was it.
You wanted to have the deployment part, right?
Yes, I was interested in the deployment part of an EE project.
Okay.
With the JBs. And then I started to work on that. And then I provided a patch to the M2 Eclipse project. And then it was like a 4,000 lines of code patch.
Not bad.
So the product lead of M2 Eclipse at the time basically merged my code and asked me if I wanted to be a committer. So I said yes. And then I started to work on the M2 project, M2 Eclipse project at the time, for Eclipse. So to basically improve the Java EE support in Eclipse for Maven. At that time, the JBoss guys, JBoss Tools guys, started to consume what I did for M2 Eclipse. Okay. And then eventually, I was in contact with Max Anderson, who you talked to apparently recently, and he hired me to work on JBoss Tools. So 2011, I started to work at Red Hat on JBoss Tools, everything related to Maven that I could work on, Maven project examples. What else?
And you also contributed back to M2E, or is this JBoss?
Yeah, and so that was JBoss Tools. So we had, I still was contributing to M2 Eclipse, but we had some things specific to JBoss that we wanted, that did not make sense to contribute to M2 Eclipse because it was too specific. And then, I started to work for Red Hat on tooling, something that started as a, let's say, hobby. On my spare time, I got to be paid for, full time. So it was a dream. Yeah. Pretty awesome. So we had an awesome team. The JBoss Tools years were pretty awesome.
When you actually learned Java, because you mentioned several times, you did a little bit JSPs, then you did COBOL.
So,
were the period in your life where you really learned Java, from beginning, or how you learned Java actually?
So, as I said, I was at that point where I was working for a subsidiary of IBM, doing mainframe and WebSphere stuff. That's when I really started to play with Java.
And you learned Java with trainings, workshops, you built something? How you learn Java?
Well, I just dived into it.
Okay. Because you knew the basics from COBOL, and I think COBOL still will have, for loops and ifs and whatever. So you just translated your knowledge from COBOL to Java. This was probably first what happened, and then this was training on the job, right?
I think I've had some training, like really basic training in JSP. JSPs and maybe a tiny bit of Java, but it was ridiculous, the amount of training I had. Okay. So no, mostly I learned on the job.
Okay. And but you do Java for the entire time, right? Since 10 years, you're a Java hacker, hands-on Java hacker, right? Yeah. Cool. Completely. So regarding M2E, so around the time 2006 and 2008, interestingly, I left actually Eclipse because I was a huge Eclipse proponent. As Eclipse came out, it was one of the first tools which really was really good with refactoring. And back then, a lot of my clients used JBoss, JBuilder, JBuilder Enterprise and Professional. And it was really not that good with refactoring. So you could, even at the beginning of JBuilder, if you renamed a file, it was, the imports were not fixed. So this was not even the basics were there. And I think with JBuilder 3, it happened. And then the problem was JBuilder was expensive, and this was the entire discussion was licensing or whatever. It's like, look, let's take Eclipse. And Eclipse was way better. So the refactoring worked perfectly. And the problem started later because we got more and more plugins for Eclipse. And in one point of time, I actually forgot the number. What I remember, I had 30 different workspaces of Eclipse with different plugin sets, and depending on my clients. And the problem with the whole, OSGI plugin story, that one plugin could destroy the entire workspace. So I remember back then there was some MDA, model-driven architecture tools, and if you used one wrong XML parser, this tool didn't work anymore. So you had to be really cautious which sets of plugins you're actually installing. And I say, look, this is a complete mess. And people actually asking me right now which IDEs I'm using. And I get the same questions 10 years ago. And I say, hey, look, Maven does not work in Eclipse. And what I said, a similar experience to, let's say, NetBeans, I switched to NetBeans back then, is actually JBoss developer tools. Because you can download everything at once and you get, something which works out of the box. And even if you don't use JBoss, you can at least, use the enterprise part of it. And the people were actually surprised. That was my answer, because back then I used a lot of, Payara, not Payara, was before Payara, Glassfish. And JBoss had a hard time back then, I remember. I didn't use JBoss a lot because this was the JBoss 5 main timeline, and that JBoss was not very good, timeline for JBoss back then. And but then they caught up, and now is everything fine. But the feedback to it was interesting. So M2E had really terrible functionality, and M2E, there was another tool for Eclipse. It wasn't M2E. It was a little bit better with Maven. I forgot. It was a complete different name. Remember the name?
It's probably Q4J, Q4E.
Yes, I think so. Because there were in one point of time, just another Maven tool just appeared, and it was a little bit better than this M2E, but was not as popular as M2E. And yeah. And since then, I never used Eclipse again, actually, because now lots of my clients are using IntelliJ. And if they have, I also have a license. And if they don't have, I use NetBeans because it's completely free, and more Visual Studio Code right now. And
So you're basically using Eclipse.
Yes, Eclipse without fiddling with the plugin. So I have nothing
without
against
the UI.
Eclipse. Yeah, another UI, and I use the Visual Studio Code UI because I need it for frontend. And if I can use the same UI for both, is nice, right? So this is like more or less pragmatic. And if it works for a larger project, I still prefer NetBeans, but the Visual Studio Code is catching up. Okay, so now you spend your time at Red Hat. So with JBoss developer tool, what you did then the last 9 years in JBoss developer tools space?
So again,
major achievements.
Major achievements. I guess I did some cool stuff with M2E.
Okay.
I was pretty proud of the way I managed to handle war overlays in Eclipse.
Okay.
It was a complete hack of Eclipse APIs.
Mm-hmm.
But I still managed to do something that was, and it worked pretty well. Not 100% as compatible with every feature of Maven war overlays, but it was pretty interesting.
Why you needed overlays?
I didn't. Users did.
Okay. And I got some requests about overlays, and I ask why users would like to have overlays. You know this?
So I think they want to have basically they want to share common files.
Mm-hmm.
Like say you have a company that has, I don't know, a set of logos, CSS files and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to have a common look and feel across your applications. You can achieve that with a war overlay.
Mm-hmm.
So we can do that differently for now, now using different technologies. But back then, war overlay could have been a solution. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying it was the right solution or a bad solution, but it could have been done. So yeah, I've managed to tweak Eclipse's APIs, bend them to my will, to provide some kind of support for war overlay. So I was pretty happy when I managed to do that.
Mm-hmm. How long did it took? So it was like how many nights?
So I was doing it on my day job, but it took a bit.
If you have a problem, can you sleep well?
Depends.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can't.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's been a long. I don't remember. I talked about it recently, but it's been a long time since I woke up. I woke up during the night with like the solution to my problem.
Yeah.
It hasn't happened in a while. But yeah, it was fun time.
Okay.
So yeah, mostly at the beginning, Maven related stuff, and then I moved on to at some point working on OpenShift development, OpenShift tools development.
Oh, which specific support we get to OpenShift? So what you can do with OpenShift and IDE?
So at the time when I was working on it, so it's been a long time now, but you could connect to an OpenShift cluster or server, and then list all the projects, list all the resources, list all the pods.
Okay.
Take a Maven project and you wanted to deploy it to OpenShift. So you just had to right click on the project and more or less click on deploy to OpenShift.
Okay.
Was that kind of thing. So it would.
You use a lot of REST APIs with OpenShift, I suppose, right?
Yeah. So we had a OpenShift API client written in Java. We were also able to do some on-the-fly debugging or on-the-fly deployment. So you change one file, and the file would be rsynced directly to the pod. So you could see you make your change, you save, and then you refresh your browser, and the file has been sent to the pod and served directly. So almost similar to what you would experience with local development.
Okay.
So that was pretty cool.
When was it? 3 years ago?
So it was. So I stopped it in September 2016.
Okay.
September 2016 is when I started to work on VS Code.
Oh, that long.
Yeah.
And you started with the Visual Studio Code support for Java, or was it something there?
No, so the story of VS Code for Java, or Java for VS Code, started with a prototype. It was done by a colleague of mine, Gorkim Ergen. Started it as an experiment when we saw that VS Code was based on the LSP or what's it called?
Language server protocol.
Yeah. So the idea is that you build a tool for your language, you build it once, and then every editor or IDE that support the LSP will be able to consume your tool. So that was the idea. At the time, VS Code started to become pretty popular pretty quickly. But of course, there was no Java support. And then Gorkim started to see if he could create a language server using a headless Eclipse process. So he started to work on that. Several people from Microsoft and Red Hat and IBM, I think, worked on it for a week during a hackathon in Switzerland. And they came up with pretty much all that we have today in VS Code Java. I mean, the basic support. So completion support, linting. When you make an error, you'll see compilation errors and whatnot. So Gorkim started to work on that for a few months. And then I think he started in June I think it was June 2016. And in September, he knew that I wanted to switch gears, because I wanted to do something else in OpenShift stuff. So he asked me to join him. So it was just the two of us working on it. And because I had some knowledge about Maven stuff in Eclipse, I started to implement Maven support in VS Code Java.
Okay.
And on and on and on. And we went on to improve VS Code Java over time. So it was basically the two of us at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, I don't remember when exactly, but Microsoft contacted us because they wanted to help us improve Java support in VS Code. They were really keen into having the best Java experience possible in VS Code.
Mm-hmm.
I guess is that they wanted to sell Azure to Java developers.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And Microsoft started to contribute to VS Code Java. So if we take a step back, what is VS Code Java exactly? It's an extension to Visual Studio Code. So there are two parts. There's the client part, the VS Code Java extension itself, which has defines a bunch of commands. And then there's the server part, which is an Eclipse project today. It's called the Eclipse JDTLS project. JDT because JDT stands for Java Development Toolkit, and LS for Language Server. So we are basically running Eclipse JDT, the compiler and all the Java tools that Eclipse provides. We are running it as a headless process, and VS Code Java serves the results.
Yeah, and it works pretty well. So the only problem is it consumes a little bit of memory, half a gig. And this is not a problem at all for me, but if I showcase Quarkus or other application servers, I have to be careful because people are assuming that the half gig is the server. It's like, no, this is a Java process, Visual Studio Code. And they say, what? Visual Studio Code is Java? It's like, no, not Visual Studio Code. It's the language server part. And and then if I kill it, then it works. But it is a pretty resilient process because if you kill the language server, it just recovers. So I never had a problem with that. So I could kill it and I could just showcase and then it still keep working. So it is going to be restarted automatically behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's I think it's a feature of VS Code when their client API basically says, okay, if the process fails, then I start another one.
Exactly.
So.
And this Visual Studio Code, I think, is still now your main passion, right? So during the day. And what are you working on right now?
So right now, I'm working on 3 projects.
Okay.
So I'm leading a small team where at Red Hat we are working on 3 Visual Studio Code extensions. So the main one is Visual Studio Code Java. But on that one, I just have one developer working on it. And we have lots of new features and bug fixes provided by Microsoft. Their team is in Shanghai, in China. They're doing an amazing job at providing new stuff.
Who would thought, right, that Microsoft is pushes Java that far, right?
No, they know their Java. They're pretty good. So that's one thing. The other 2 projects I'm working on at Red Hat right now are the XML extension for VS Code.
Okay.
So again, this is based on a Java a language server written in Java. This time it's not based on Eclipse. It's a Java process that runs, that uses the Xerces parser. It's a fault-tolerant parser.
Nice.
That's built on top of Xerces.
Okay.
And it works pretty well. We have completion for XSDs, DTDs, photo closing tags.
Nice.
Yeah, it's I think it's the most complete XML support you could get in VS Code today.
And why you working on XML today? I mean, we have YAML problem solved, right?
Well, maybe not anyone is using XML anymore, unless maybe the people using Maven.
Ah, sure. Yeah, you are right. No, I think it's a good thing to have a great XML support. And you said this is a linear parser. So what could be interesting to parse HTML, right?
I guess it could parse HTML.
Yeah.
So the language server was basically done initially. So it was a funny story again. So I started to work on it with an intern at Red Hat, and then I didn't do much. It was basically my intern who was doing all the work. Nicholas, come on in.
Okay.
And then
I think now he takes a sabbatical 1 year after the experience, I guess, right?
And no, he's great.
Okay. But after working with you for 1 year, and he was completely overpowered, and I was like, I have to take 1 year off or something like this.
I don't know. You'll have to ask him. So yeah, we started to work on that, and then again, it was an initiative from Gorkim. Gorkim tends to start projects, and then once he has a working prototype, he moves on to another project.
This is a great pipeline. Okay.
Yeah. And then I take over, and then I give the rest of the work to interns. So so we started to work on an XML language server, and then at the time we found out that another person, Angelo Zer, was also making an XML based language server. And then we contacted him. We started to look at differences between our implementations and see if we could combine our efforts into just doing one server. So Angelo, what Angelo did was he took the VS Code HTML language server that's written in TypeScript and translated it into Java, basically.
Cool.
Because the HTML language server provides a fault tolerant parser, and that was what was interesting. And so we started to work with Angelo, and eventually we hired Angelo to keep working on us with us on the on-site project. So it's kind of similar story that I experienced with myself with the M2 Eclipse stuff.
So we have 2 projects now. What's the third one?
All right. So the third one is Quarkus tools for Visual Studio Code.
Okay.
So this one, so we started to work on a project last year. We started to have the idea of providing an extension that would just for starters, it would just help you create a new Quarkus project. There was actually a project made started by another Red Hat employee, Tiomir. I can't remember his last name. So we started to work with his code base. And eventually I think our first iteration, our first release was just that, a way to create a new Quarkus project from VS Code. And then we started to add new features. One thing we've been inspired by was the Spring Boot tool suite support for application properties for Spring Boot projects. So the idea is that when you open an application.properties, you'll be able to list, when you do some completion, you'll be able to list all the available properties in your project.
What is great. So what my feedback to this Quarkus is, I like the Quarkus extensions for everything except project creation. So from my point of view, this is way easier to create project in terminal than open code -n dot, the project, the folder with Visual Studio Code, and then the support is great. And the reason for that is you get more questions asked inside Visual Studio Code. I think there's one question more, and it sometimes creates project in different folder. So I opened the Visual Studio Code it runs all the time in a folder, and then I create a project, and it creates the project somewhere else, the Quarkus project. So this is why. That
sounds strange. When you create, so if you open an empty VS Code window, and you say, I want to generate a new Quarkus project, by default, it won't ask you anything. Well, it will ask you the questions for creating your project, but it will put it will open the created project directly in the window that the empty window that you've opened. Yes. Now, if you already have a window open with content in it, so you have an open folder, after you created a project, you'll be asked whether you want to add the new project to the current workspace, or you want to open it in a new window.
Okay. So I just played around with it. This is the only thing which was not that obvious to me, and this was, I mean, there's no Quarkus create command is very simple. So Maven Quarkus create. So this is what I usually do, and then open the. But I will give it a shot again. The problem is I use Visual Studio Code for different purposes, and usually I have multiple instances running, and I use the terminal as well. So what can happen? Then I switch, the folders inside the terminal, and then do this, and then my expectations are different. You know what I mean? So if I open the terminal and Visual Studio Code, and I go to my favorite, showcase folder, let's say junk, or my work folder workspaces. So if I go to junk and I do the create Quarkus project, so my expectation, which is of course wrong because the terminal has nothing to do with Visual Studio Code, but in the terminal inside, Visual Studio Code shows me junk, and where it will create a project is where I opened Visual Studio Code, I guess. So I had to try this a few times, but it works well. But it's just funny because you said you created the extensions for for project creation, and I really like the other things like properties, code completion, and all the other stuff, right?
Sure. We wanted to start with something simple.
Yeah.
So project creation was the simplest thing we could do. Yeah. But then we've made some pretty cool improvements. So property support is one thing. So it allows you to facilitate the addition of properties file. Eventually, we ended up providing kind of similar support for YAML files. So in Quarkus, if you add one specific YAML extension, you can define your properties in a YAML file.
I try to keep Quarkus YAML support, YAML support secret, so that no one will find out that actually Quarkus supports YAML. And another cool story is if you are in the JAX resource, you can click on the on so small label
code lens.
And it will open the browser, for instance. It's also so nice touches.
That's one of the other things that we did. So we started after the project creation, the wizard. So you can create a project, but you can also add extensions. And I think that's pretty useful because it allows you to browse through the extensions pretty easily.
Yeah, and this is faster than the command line. This is what I think Shift Command P, and then opens the add Quarkus extension. You can select multiple, enter, and is set.
Yeah. So there, wizards, and then property support, and then we moved on to providing support for Java classes. So the idea then was to say, okay, once you have a running Quarkus application, if you have some REST endpoints, maybe we could provide, again, inspired by the Spring Boot tool suite things, we can provide links to open the REST endpoints directly. So that's what we did. And pretty recently, like a couple months ago, we started to have requests for providing more support for properties in Quarkus. And then some of those properties are coming from MicroProfile projects. They are MicroProfile specific properties. So they're not related to Quarkus directly.
Like REST client MP, right? For instance.
Exactly. So that's when we started to refactor the language server for Quarkus into basically 2 bits. So there would be a core language server for MicroProfile, and then the Quarkus things would just be an extension to MicroProfile.
which is nice.
Like it is in real life.
Yeah, this is perfect.
And that's when IBM started to contact us about working on a microprofile language server. Even though Red Hat and IBM are one and the same, they're not really.
Yeah, I think the companies are supposed to still to be separated, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Red Hat is basically acting independently. At least for us developers, it made zero difference. The acquisition made zero difference. So they started to work on their own microprofile language server, and then again we discussed about joining forces. And right now we're in the process of so IBM started to contribute to the Quarkus / microprofile language server. And that's why in the latest releases, we've had lots of microprofile related enhancements. So the goal in the future would be to provide to split the Quarkus and the microprofile bits so that you can install microprofile support independently from Quarkus. And the Quarkus extension would be dependent on the microprofile core tools.
This is important, that if I install Quarkus, I don't have to install MicroProfile, it just pulls the MicroProfile as well.
Yes, it's exactly. It will pull the dependency.
Very good. Otherwise, I will end up like my experience 10 years ago with Eclipse,
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, for sure, the plugin management is way different in VS Code compared to Eclipse. It's much simpler. So you can argue that the Eclipse plugin management is superior in some, dependency resolution conflicts, maybe. But it's way more clunky, way slower. It's really a pain to install plugins in Eclipse, I find. Even though the Eclipse marketplace helps, still it's the process of installing a plugin in Eclipse is painfully slow.
Yeah.
It's much more pleasant to do that in VS Code.
Yeah. One question regarding Java support in Visual Studio Code, because I actually forgot what I did. So I have Maven support, Quarkus, and Java support. If someone would like to have identical experience to how many plugins are they to install? Can I just straight install Quarkus and it will install everything else? Or will I have to start with Java and then Maven and then Quarkus?
All right. So that's one problem with the VS Code ecosystem, I guess. It can also be complicated to find the proper plugins to install. So I am dealing with the VS Code Java extension, which is, let's say, a standalone extension. It just provides ways to compile your projects, like provides completion, and diagnostics if you mess up with the code. Then Microsoft came up with other extensions that plugged into VS Code Java. They have support for running tests and running main classes, basically.
Exactly. You also have a great JUnit support with visualization, so you can run unit tests exactly from Visual Studio Code.
Yeah. So they have that. They have Maven, VS Code Maven extension, Tomcat extension, I think. Even though we talked about. So Red Hat also has a VS Code extension for running Tomcat now, and Microsoft is looking into using ours.
Okay.
Anyways, they have multiple extensions, and they created an extension pack that combines everything. The core Java experience will be provided when you install that one extension pack. Now, if you want to have Quarkus on top of that, you can install Quarkus from the welcome page of that Java extension pack. There's a welcome page where you can install Spring Boot Tools, Quarkus, and there's probably links to some other extensions related to Java, like Textile. Now, if you don't do that,
I think this is what I did, because for me, Visual Studio Code is the main sponsor is Microsoft. So if I found, Java extension from Microsoft, it's okay, I would prefer this one. And I think I installed this and then Quarkus. This is what I did, because I cannot remember, fiddling too much, and everything worked out of the box. And people ask me sometimes on YouTube or, on comments on my blog, what you did that it works so smooth, and actually did nothing. So what I remember is I installed one extension from Microsoft. This was the Java one, and one Quarkus, I think.
Right. So that's one way to do it. Now, if you start from scratch and install the VS Code Quarkus extension, what you'll get is the VS Code Java extension as a dependency and the VS Code Java runner extension as well.
Okay.
So in that case, you will be missing the test extension.
Okay. But Maven is still supported, right? Has to.
Still, yes. Yeah. Maven and Gradle are part of the VS Code Java extension, the core support.
Okay, so if I install the Microsoft bundle, I get everything I usually get plus JUnit support or unit test support. And if I start with Quarkus, with empty Visual Studio Code, I won't have the unit test support.
Yes, okay. That's pretty much it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, perfect. So now I have, the right answers, because I just thought about, deleting the entire Visual Studio Code and reinstall it from scratch to see what I actually did. But yeah.
The other thing that you will probably be missing will be the VS Code XML extension if you're using Maven. I think that's an extension to have because it gives you some completion. Not everything, but not the dependencies, but at least the rest of the XML document. You'll get proper completion based on the XSD.
Yeah, cool.
So yeah.
So thank you. So we covered a lot of ground. So what I would like to do is I would like to invite you in a few months again into talking about, some new project on the horizon, what you are doing, or just, cool editor hacks with Java. So because what I like to do is I already got a great feedback from you regarding systrace, which I use now more. Yeah. And little things, and shortcuts, which I really enjoy. And Visual Studio Code, people ask me, why you're using Visual Studio Code? And the answer is simple. Visual Studio Code doesn't cost anything. It's easy to install. And if I, start in a company as a consultant and they ask me, what is the tool chain? I cannot just, IntelliJ is nice, but they have to buy it. And not everyone has IntelliJ. And until they have it, the project is over. And I usually used NetBeans for that, but there is no good support in NetBeans for Quarkus. And I also do my front-end stuff with Visual Studio Code. So this is another option. This is the entire story. And I like Visual Studio Code more and more, actually. So,
So for the Quarkus bits, we started with VS Code initially, but the language server is being used by some other people at Red Hat to build an Eclipse extension, an Eclipse plugin based on that same tooling. So it will provide pretty much the same experience that you have in VS Code, but in that time in Eclipse. And also the same team is providing a plugin for IntelliJ using the same Quarkus language server to provide the same properties completion and whatnot.
So perfect. Thank you for your time. And where people can find you on the internet?
On the internet, on Twitter mostly. I'm at fbricon, FBRICON on Twitter. I'm using the same handle on GitHub. And that's it. I don't do Facebook. I don't do Instagram.
Very good.
And if you want to send me an email, you can use same handle FBRICON at redhat.com or gmail.com.
And people should, of course, follow, also this Visual Studio Code Java handle on Twitter, right?
Yes, also handle the VS Code Java handle on Twitter. So yeah, I try to. So we have basically 2 announcements a month because we do in general 2 releases a month. Hopefully that keeps people interested.
Yeah, cool. So thank you a lot. It was really fun, and I learned a lot. So now I can provide better answers, to questions.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.